Okay, in this tutorial we're going to look at the second of the easy jazzy pieces that I've written for you. The idea of this little series is that I've composed and scored up 3 short pieces that are designed to do 2 things. First off, it's about giving you something to help you improve your music reading skills. Maybe if you've worked through my Piano for Beginners tutorial series and you want to kind of keep developing the skills that we learnt there. Secondly, it's about helping you to get your head around some of the kind of idioms of jazz piano, the rhythms, the sounds and the techniques that you might use when you're playing jazz. Okay, so let's hear the piece. It's called Pump Square Shuffle, and as usual I'm going to play it through twice. First of all, I'll do it with the score on screen, and then the second time through I'll take the score down so you can see what I'm doing with my hands. Here we go. Okay, and now let's take the score down so you can see what I'm doing on the keyboard. As usual, I've created a PDF score of Pump Square Shuffle, and you can download that using the link in the description text right underneath this video. As you might have guessed, Pump Square Shuffle is all about helping you to develop your left hand, okay? And it includes 2 of the most important left hand techniques in jazz piano. We've got a walking bass line, and then a little bit later on we've got a stride pattern. By no means the only things you can do in the left hand when you're playing jazz, but they are 2 of the most useful, especially if you're playing solo, if you're playing without drums or without a bass player and you have to make your own rhythm and you know your own kind of backing, as it were. Those 2 techniques are really, really handy. Now there's interesting stuff going on in the right hand here as well, or rather there's interesting stuff that you can do in the right hand, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. For now, let's just take a look at these two left hand techniques, starting with a walking bass line. Now when you're putting together a walking bass line, there are basically two things that you can do. You can follow a scale or you can follow the notes of a chord, and what you tend to do is to mix those two approaches together. Just to show you what I mean, let's just go through the first half dozen bars of the piece, okay? Particularly focusing on the left hand. Here I'm going down a scale. And here I am coming up a chord and another chord. Okay, and there I am to bar 7. Now, when I was coming down the scale, that had been kind of planned, as it were, so that as I landed on the start of a new bar, the first beat of a new bar, I hit the tonic note of the chord in the right hand. Okay, so A minor, D minor 7, G7. Now chord progressions don't always work that conveniently for you, okay? It's just in this case, you know, the chord progression works really nicely for doing that, so that's what I've done. Yeah, but that's one thing that you can do. And notice how using the scale I'm descending, because typically in a walking bass line you will use scales to descend. Then when I want to come up again, I outline the notes of the chord. So in bar 5 I have D minor 7, and I outline the notes of the D minor 7 in the left hand, you know, one note per beat, as I have been all the way through. Then B diminished 7, and then I'm to my G at the start of bar 7. In bar 4 I had that kind of little bit of chromatic breakdown, yeah, and what I was doing there was just I've got an E minor 7 and an E flat 7 chord, and I'm just playing the root note and the 7th note of each of those chords in the left hand, and that leaves me in a really convenient position here to get to the start of the D minor chord. Yeah. The really important thing with a walking bass left hand is that it locks together nicely. Often they're quite difficult to improvise on the fly, okay? With walking bass left hands, it's really handy to kind of plan it a little bit in advance, okay? So if you're working on a new piece, just think of possible walking bass lines you can use and kind of slot them together as you go. Now, when you're playing the walking bass line, there are a few things you need to bear in mind. First of all, you're kind of almost deliberately imitating the sound of an upright bass, a real instrument. You know what? When I'm playing a walking bass, often I hear I kind of imagine an upright bass in my head. Dum 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 dum. You know, that kind of percussive sound, that kind of driving sound that a traditional acoustic upright bass makes. Okay, so bear that in mind. You need to think quite carefully about managing your fingers, okay? Because if your fingers get muddled up, that's when you have to start using lots of pedal to stick things together, and it can be quite awkward. There are several jumps in Pump Square Shuffle, and there, you know, when I come across those, I either just do the jump, or you could use a pedal to stick them together. But it's handy to be able to plan your fingering nicely, and as usual, this is where playing your scales is going to help. In general, with a walking bass left hand, you should be aiming for smoothness and consistency and kind of a little bit of a driving percussive feel. Boom, 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 boom. You know, because you're making a rhythm as well as your harmony. As I said, it takes a little bit of practice, but especially if you're good at your scales, you should find that walking bass comes fairly naturally to you. By the way, it's also another lovely thing about walking bass that I tried to demonstrate in this piece is you can give yourself a really big dynamic range. Okay, so you can be quite loud, but it's lovely for, you know, putting it in a diminuendo or a crescendo. You can really kind of swell it out and back. You know, you have a lot of control of the dynamics. A variation of walking bass turns up in the middle of the piece, where we get this walking bass in octaves. Okay, now playing walking bass in octaves isn't something you would do very often because it's really striking, okay, but it's quite a good technique to use now and then. I've put it in just to kind of stretch you a little bit, kind of both physically and mentally, because that's exactly what you are doing, okay. And playing walking bass in octaves is very much a different kettle of fish. You can't rely on your scale fingering to keep things smooth and accurate. Rather, you have to focus on accurate placement of your fingers, and it can be quite tricky. Okay, don't worry if you're just a little bit splashy, okay, if you miss things just a little bit, it's the overall effect that we're after. What you should try to do in general though is aim to play them evenly, so you want to try to give similar weight to each note in the octave if you can, okay. Keep in time when you're playing these, because again it's quite easy to lose time as well, and do warm up before you're doing any octave playing, okay, because if you're not used to them, it's, you know, you can strain your hand a little bit playing octaves. But as I say, quite an interesting technique just to drop in as a little bit of variation. So what about stride, our second important technique that we've got going on here? Stride is really common in lots of traditional jazz piano. Okay, when it's played at a moderate tempo or a slow tempo, it tends to be done with pedal. With faster pieces, often you'll hear it without pedal. And it's really useful because it gives you the same kind of drive that walking bass gives you, okay, the same kind of rhythmic drive, but you get more chord notes, you get kind of a lusher sound. Now the great problem with stride is precision, okay, landing on your notes carefully and accurately, not least because concentrating on doing that can detract your attention from what's going on in the right hand, okay. So if you're going to use stride, it's worth really kind of getting it under your fingers, practicing left-handed by itself on different chords, seeing what you can come up with and just messing around with the stride, so it's kind of second nature to you. When it comes to the accuracy, you will probably never be 100% accurate when you're playing stride. There will always be little splashes, little slightly wrong notes, and that's not such a big deal. Obviously you should aim to be as good as you can, but little splashes aren't such a big deal because it's one of those techniques where we're looking at the overall effect. Okay, so try to be precise, but don't worry too much if you just get the occasional little glitch. Same with fingering, don't worry too much, especially on the upper chords. Aim for the fingers that you're most comfortable with, and therefore which are going to lead you to be as accurate as you can be. Okay, so if you're comfortable with that fingering or more comfortable with that fingering, it doesn't really matter. Whichever you're going to land on kind of more naturally. Something else to watch out for with stride is unevenness. Okay, it's really easy to thump kind of the bottom note and just brush off the top one. I'm exaggerating there, but so when some people are playing stride, you hear that. Sometimes if you want that as an effect, that's fine, but typically we're going for evenness. You know, and sometimes that might mean just giving a little bit of an extra push to the upper chord, because what people tend to do is get to the upper chord, think, phew, I made it, and then dash off down to find the note at the bottom again. Okay, so don't just kind of brush off that top chord, give it its full weight. Okay. Now in the right hand, all I've scored is simple block chords. I call them simple, but do be careful. As I said, especially with stride, it's easy to lose focus on your right hand. Yeah, your right hand can kind of go onto autopilot and get itself into trouble while you focus on the relatively complex stuff going on in the left. So what I want you to do with these chords is really focus on playing them smoothly and evenly against the left hand. Yeah, and in particular, make sure that you've got all the notes ringing out equally. A very common problem in this sort of situation is you play the lower notes of the chord more firmly than the upper notes, and you kind of lose the upper notes, you know, that they just disappear. You lose the force of the chord. So aim for evenness. Also look out for some of the tricky transitions, especially in the section where you've got sections where you've got the walking bass in the left hand. Okay, so if you look at bar 4, in fact I'll just play from bar 3. Okay, going from that E minor 7 to the E flat 7 to the D minor 7 is quite tricky, because you've got the E flat 7, probably your third on the E flat, and you've got to get over that F sharp or G flat, whatever you want to call it, down to the D minor 7 chord. Now, as far as you can, try to do that smoothly and without using the pedal. In the stride sections, pedal is fine, use pedal if you want to, but when it comes to the jumps in the walking bass sections, try to get away without using the pedal. I think I maybe did a couple of times for the big jumps at the end of sections, but if you can, as far as possible, avoid using the pedal. Now, if you want to make things more exciting for yourself, and why wouldn't you, you can start to play around with the rhythm of those chords. Couple of techniques I was using there. I was using the kind of syncopated stabbing effect. Okay, and in my head, what I'm thinking of there is the kind of the brass section of a big band. Da 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 da. Yeah, that kind of percussive sound that the piano is actually quite good at. So playing around with that rhythm. I'm also using, the second little technique I'm using there is rhythmic anticipation. Just watch the timing of the right against the left here. Do you see that each time the chord is coming in, the change of chord is coming in slightly ahead of the change of the bar? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that rhythmic anticipation is very, very common in jazz. Don't do it on every bar necessarily, but drop it in, mix it in with a bit of syncopation, and you'll get some really interesting sounds. The other thing you can do, of course, is play around with the chords themselves, make more interesting chord sounds. You know, there are all kinds of things you can do. The point of Pump Square Shuffle, though, as I say, is to develop your left hand. So don't start mucking about in the right and trying to do cool stuff until you've done, you know, the kind of the hard yards of getting the left hand walking bass and stride as clear and accurate and as jazzy as you can. Okay, so there we go, another piano tutorial grinds to its inevitable end. There'll be another of these easy jazzy pieces, the third of the series, coming out next month, because based on the feedback, I think you guys really liked the first one, so you know, I'm always keen to do more of stuff that you like. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be doing all my usual tutorials as well. There should be another one coming out next week or the week after, depending on when I get it shot. Subscribe to my channel, please follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Please do check out my Instagram, because I'm starting to do quite a lot of cool stuff on there. Instagram.com/Bill Hilton, link is below. And as usual, please check out my books, especially How to Really Play the Piano, the Stuff Your Teacher Never Taught You, and maybe An Introduction to Cocktail Piano, which uses quite a few of the techniques that I've been talking about today. You know, there's a fair bit in that book about what you can do with chords to extend them and so on. And such like. And please do check out my Patreon crowdfunding campaign at patreon.com/Bill Hilton. If you can spare a couple of dollars every month to help me make this stuff, that would be amazing. Questions, comments, give me a shout. Always happy to hear from people. I'll see you next time.